Good afternoon. How many of you been to Delaware before? Raise your hand. I mean, not just drive through, pay the toll. Maybe come to one of our five-star beaches. All right. Not paid our sales tax. We don't have sales tax. Any of you incorporated in Delaware? Anybody incorporated in Delaware? God bless you. God bless you. It's nice to be here with all of you. Anybody here from West Virginia? Anybody from West Virginia? I was born in West Virginia. Anybody here from Virginia? I grew up in Danville and Roanoke. Anybody here from Ohio? I went to Ohio State Navy ROTC midshipman. Anybody here from Florida? All right. Went to Pensacola for my pre-flight training. Anybody here from Texas? I'm not going to mess with you guys. Corpus Christi, Naval Air Station. Spent some time there on my way to California and then to Southeast Asia. Do we have any veterans here? Stand up. If you're a veteran, stand up. Let's give them some round. Give them some love. Come on. Did 5 years in a hot war in Southeast Asia, another 18 years after that as a P-3 aircraft mission commander, Navy P-3 aircraft mission commander, retired Navy captain, and when I was governor of Delaware, I served for 8 years as commander-in-chief of the Delaware National Guard. Half my life has been affiliated with the military, and it's maybe the best part of my life. When I arrived in Pensacola, Florida, I was 21 years old. I played sports in high school and intramurals at Ohio State, but I was in pretty good shape, and before they put us in airplanes for Pensacola, they put us through a really rigorous physical conditioning regimen. And I was in good shape when I got there. I was in great shape when I left, and best shape of my life. And I said, I want to stay right here for as long as I can. As long as I can. I'm 72 years old, and as of January 23rd, I have not missed a day's work in 35 years. I work out 6-7 days a week. 3 days I lift, 2 days I run outside, 2 days I ride a bike inside. No, go. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I know it was healthy. I have a lot of aphorisms. Aphorisms is something you kind of say over and over and over again. And one of the aphorisms I like to talk about is find out what works and do more of that. And that's probably something that y'all try to do as well. I got to be right out of the Navy, moved to Delaware, got an MBA, and ran for state treasurer the very next year. I'd been in Delaware less than 3 years, and I didn't have anybody run for state treasurer. We had the worst credit rating in the country. We were tied for dead last with Puerto Rico, had no pension fund. All our money was at a state-owned bank about to go under, and I got to be state treasurer because nobody wanted to run. And Pete DuPont was elected governor at the same time, and I remember a month after he'd been elected, being in Legislative Hall, he gave his first State of the State address, and he announced that we were bankrupt. And I'm sitting next to an old bull of a state senator from southern Delaware, and he looked at me and said, Tom, now you know why nobody else wanted to run for treasurer. But I did, and thanks to his leadership, I hope to help a little bit. We, 6 years later, had a AA credit rating, and I ended up in Congress and the House of Representatives. I was a deficit hawk. I still am. They call us Blue Dog Democrats. And I was always fiscally conservative, progressive on social issues. And that comes in a way out of the Bible, and some of you went to church yesterday. Maybe somebody in your church preached out of the pulpit Matthew 25, and Matthew 25 says something like this: when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me a drink? When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? It doesn't say anything about when my only access to health care was in the emergency room of a hospital, did you do anything about it? But I think the inference is clear. When people are needy, we have an obligation to help them. It's a moral obligation, but since we don't have unlimited resources or finances, there's a fiscal imperative to meet that moral imperative in a fiscally responsible way. I want you to use your imagination. Think of a big pie chart like that, and that's the federal budget. Almost exactly one half of the pie chart is entitlement spending. That's stuff that we're entitled to by virtue of our age. We're old enough for Medicare, or maybe poor enough for Medicaid. We might be a veteran, eligible for veterans benefits, but about half of the The budget of our country is entitlement spending. Another 10% is principal and interest on our debt. Thank God interest rates have been low or remain low, because if they didn't, the deficit would be even higher than it is already. So you got 50% entitlement, 10% debt service. The other 40% is appropriated spending. Over half of that 40% is defense spending. We could eliminate everything else, the whole rest of the federal government, and we'd still have a budget deficit. The deficit for our budget was just announced the other day. For last year, it's $757 billion. $757 billion. The deficit for this year is expected to be a little over $850 billion. The deficit for next year is expected to reach $1 trillion. That is not sustainable. That is not sustainable. And there's an outfit called GAO. You've heard of GAO, General Accountability Office. They're going to come out later this week with what they call the high-risk list. High-risk list is ways of wasting money. And we're at risk for wasting money in a variety of ways. About $140 billion, and that is something called improper payments, overpayments, underpayments, mistakes. And a good deal of that is Medicare and Medicaid. The point I'm trying to make here is we are on a path that is not sustainable. We're on a path that is not sustainable. And fortunately, we have a strong economy. We had Barack Obama and Joe Biden took office at the bottom of the worst recession since the Great Depression. We had 8 years of economic growth. We've had 2 more years, and in part because of a lot of stimulus that comes from the tax package that was adopted. But it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And part of what I want to do, and what I hope you want to do, is figure out how we can continue to provide good health care, better health care going forward, and at the same time do it in a more cost-effective way. Last week we had the CEOs from 7 of our largest pharmaceutical companies before the Finance Committee, and sort of I can digest and drill down to what they actually were getting at, and I think the consensus of the hearing, which actually turned out to be pretty constructive, was we need to figure out how to provide and develop pharmaceuticals and to be able to, so that they're effective, and as time goes by, even more effective, that they add value. We need to be able to do it in a cost-effective way, and we need to be able to do it and price the drugs in such a way that there is an incentive for innovation to invest money in future cures. Think of dementia. Think of Alzheimer's disease. And so that's the sort of 3 things we want to get done in pharmaceuticals, and in a way, that's what I think we want to do for healthcare writ large. I want to thank you as hospitals for trying to make sure that we did not destroy the structure of the Affordable Care Act, that we try to keep it integral and solid. I'm a student of history, and maybe some of you are as well. I remember back in 1993, there's a woman named Hillary Clinton, brand new in the White House, First Lady, looking for something to do. She talked to her husband, and she said, I'd be interested in health care, to try to figure out how we could extend health care to everybody and do it in a cost-effective way. And he said, go to it. And she worked on, pulled together really smart people. They worked on something called Romneycare. If my life depended on it, I could not tell you what Romneycare was all about. Sorry, I just don't know. But the Republicans started ridiculing her, saying, Romneycare. There was actually TV commercials I remember watching. And Hillary and her folks finally said there are the people who are ridiculing. Said, well, if you're so smart, where's your idea? Like, where is your idea? And so they put their heads on, and they got their brains working, and they came up with the legislation introduced by John Chafee. John Chafee, wonderful Republican, former Secretary of the Navy, former governor of Rhode Island. And he had come up with a legislation that's co-sponsored by 23 Senate Republicans. And here's what it did. It created, in every state, an exchange where people who didn't have coverage could buy coverage, especially. And if they had low income, there would be a sliding scale tax credit so that people would get some help from the Treasury to afford their health care until their income reached a certain level. There'd be an individual mandate. People have to get coverage. And if they didn't, there'd be some kind of fine to compel them, encourage them, not make them, you can't make people get coverage, but to encourage people to do that. And those were the sort of the basic precepts of it. Romneycare drops away, kind of disappears. John Chafee's legislation didn't go anywhere. And But that was 93, and about 12 years later, an enterprising young governor from Massachusetts named Mitt Romney was thinking about running for president. And he brought his think tank together, and they said, you know, you might help yourself run for president if you can sort of demonstrate to the rest of the country how to provide health care for folks who didn't have the health care coverage, and do it in a way that sort of harnesses market forces. That harnesses market forces. And what did they come up? They came up with Romneycare. They literally lifted the game plan from John Chafee and introduced Romneycare, and it worked. The first couple of years, you know, a lot of people signed up because they adjusted coverage. They didn't do so well on cost, but they got more providers involved. There's more hospitals involved, more insurance companies involved. The affordability sort of straightened out as well. I was a brand new member of the not of the Senate, but of the Finance Committee in 2009, and we were looking around the world to find out what worked in order to get better health care results for less money. And you know what we seized upon? Romneycare. And we decided to take that approach and set it up in every state. I thought it was a good idea when Chafee introduced it. I thought it was a real good idea when Mitt Romney introduced it to Massachusetts. I thought it was a good idea when we put it in the Affordable Care Act. And so here today, I still think it's a good idea. And I don't know that we've ever really given that good idea a fair chance to be successful. I applaud you because you have been willing to work with it, and to try to make this all work out in the end to sort of achieve those 2 or 3 goals that I talked about earlier. I want to mention a guy named Steve Bird. Steve Bird used to run a big supermarket chain. The supermarket chain was called Safeway, and we have Safeways in Delaware. You probably have in a bunch of your states as well. He came to see me when we were working on the Affordable Care Act, and he said, "Senator, we have flatlined healthcare costs at Safeway for 5 years." I said, "Really? What did you do? Reduce the coverage? Did you increase the deductibles and copays?" He said, "Nope." He said, "Here's what we do at Safeway." And he said, "I want you to come out to California on East Bay and actually see what we do." At Safeway, the folks who come to work there, they, first of all, they have cafeterias. If they get to eat healthy food, guess what? It's cheaper. If they don't eat healthy food, it's more expensive. They have fitness facilities on their campus, and they're free. They open early, they stay open late. For people get a physical every year. If they have high blood pressure, they can bring down the cost of their premiums by bringing down their blood pressure. If they're overweight, they can bring down their health care premiums, their costs, by bringing down their weight. If they're smokers, they can bring down their premiums by stopping smoking. And I think too often we treat the symptoms of problems, and we don't treat the underlying causes, the root causes. The cost drivers in our country, as you know, are weight, obesity. A third of us are obese. Nobody in this room, as I can best tell. But in the country, a third. Almost one third of the kids in our country are obese. And you know what drivers those are for cost. The other thing I want to mention, there's an old African proverb about if you want to go fast, travel alone. If you want to go far, travel together. I think if you want to go far, one of the things we need to do is communicate better. And we do that through electronic health records. We stood up something in Delaware called the DIN, Delaware Health Information Network. And it's an opportunity for doctors to talk to hospitals to talk to one another, to talk to nursing homes, to talk to LabCorp and all those folks. And to do so in a way that enables them to share information, to collaborate in the delivery of health care for the patients in our state. It works. It actually works. And I would say if they were here today, I'd ask Tommy Thompson to stand up and take a bow. I would ask Mike Levitt, both former secretaries of Health and Human Services, to stand up and take a bow, because when I stepped down as governor, one of the last bills I signed as governor was creating the Delaware Health Information Network. I had no idea how valuable it would turn out to be. But I said to both of them, Tommy and to Michael, I said, this could be a model for the country. And 10 years later, it is. And I would just suggest to whatever part of the country y'all are from to keep it in mind. And again, when I was governor of Delaware, I got to be chairman of the National Governors Association. In the NGA, we had something called the Center for Best Practice, a clearinghouse for good ideas. And we were always looking to steal ideas from our sister states. And this is a good idea that I would suggest be stolen from others. I'm an Ohio State boy. Do we have anybody here from Michigan? You guys see that football game last? That's fun. I won't go there. I'm a huge Detroit Tigers fan for no good reason. I love the Tigers. Have ever since I was 9 years old. When I was my last year as governor, they invited me to Tiger Stadium. I got to throw out the opening pitch. Last week, they played in Tiger Stadium. So I have great affection for Michigan. My stepson from my first marriage lives up in Rochester Hills, so have great affection. But Barack Obama was, when he was president, early in his time, first year he was president, he ended up in Ann Arbor. Didn't go there for a sports game. He went up there to learn about something called Sorry Works. Sorry Works. And here's the way Sorry works. You probably heard of it before, maybe not in those terms. But it's if a physician or somebody who's providing, doing an operation, performing a procedure, screws up, messes up, they don't just hide it. They don't hide it. They don't stonewall. They don't bring in the attorneys and try to don't let anything happen. They bring whoever committed the mistake that caused hardship, whether it's pain, suffering, extensive loss of work, duress, and the provider apologizes to the person who's been inconvenienced or harmed. They offer some kind of financial remuneration, and if it's accepted, then that's fine. If it is not, then everything that takes place in that room between the provider, the hospital, and the patient remains in that room. It can't be used in a court of law. That idea, Sorry Works, out of Michigan, moved over to Illinois. It's been grown into something called 7 Pillars. We have a pretty big regional hospital in Delaware. It's a nonprofit called Romneycare, you may have heard of, and they adopted it about 2 years ago. And it's they have been successful in making several things happen at once. One, better outcomes. 2, actually lower costs. 3, better morale, higher patient satisfaction. And again, back to what I said earlier, find out what works, do more of that. 7 Pillars, also known as Sorry Works, works. And I would urge you to keep that in mind if you're not already doing it. The last thing I want to say, everything I do, I know I can do better. I'll say that again. Everything I do, I know I can do better. I think the same is true of all of us. It's certainly true of where I work in the United States Senate and the Congress. And I'm one of those people, I like working across the aisle. I'm a Democrat. Both my parents were Republicans. When they found out I was a Democrat running for state treasurer, they almost disowned me. Almost. But they didn't. And this is the kind of deal where we need to work together. We need to work together, not just how Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate and with the President, but with all of you and a lot of other people across the country who want to provide health care and provide better health care at an affordable price. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to do that. But my dad was a big believer in common sense. Big believer in common sense. He was chief petty officer in World War II, tough as nails, and he used to say, I don't know if you remember stuff that your parents said to you when you were a kid growing up. My dad used to say to my sister and me, we do have a job to do, didn't do it well. He would always say, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And the other thing he would say a lot was when he pulled some boneheaded stunt, he would say, just use some common sense. Just use some common sense. He said both of those things a lot. Maybe that reminds you of your childhood growing up, or maybe with your own kids. Martha and I have 2 boys, 29 and 30. We have a stepson who's a little older than that, lives up in Michigan, as I said. Got one out in Palo, California, finishing up at a business school. He couldn't get into Delaware, waitlisted there, had to go to some other place. And Benny Ben is our 29-year-old. He's up in New York City, works for Lazard, vice president at age 29. And we're real proud of him. I want to turn over to them and their generation, a country that's getting better, a country that's doing everything better. And I'll close with this. Delaware is the first state. I don't know what state y'all are from, but I think we have all the United States that are represented here. We're the first state. We ratified the Constitution before anybody else did, December 7th, 1787. And I don't know if when you were in school, maybe you had to do what we had to do in my school. We had to memorize not the whole Constitution, but we had to memorize the preamble to the Constitution. And it starts off something like this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. That's it. A more perfect union. It does not say in order to form a perfect union. It says a more perfect union. And Martin Luther King used to say, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. Well, for us, we're never going to be perfect. None of us, as hard as we might try. But we ought to be trying. And that's what the Constitution calls for. Last thing I would say is, anybody ever go to Great Britain? Anybody ever gone to London? Everybody in here ever go to London? My family and I went there. My wife's retired from DuPont and University of Delaware, but we got our boys just before we all headed out over Hell's Half Acre around across the country. But we went to London one summer for 10 days or so. And one of the places we went was these underground barracks where Churchill lived. He and his wife lived, and all their leaders, military leaders and other leaders, lived under the city of London. And I think they call them the barracks, the Churchill barracks. And you could go through there, and it's like you could hear his voice everywhere you went, and some of his famous quotes and great visuals, film, and so forth. And whenever people say to me, talking about the disruption in our country and how we can't get along, how we can't work together, and a lady said to me, gosh, just last week, a couple of people said to me, I wouldn't want your job for all the tea in China. You must hate your job. And I said, no, I like my job. I feel lucky. There are 1,900 people in the history of the country who got to do what I do, and I feel really privileged to be able to serve in this capacity. And she said to me, it's never been this bad before. We've never had it this bad before. And I said, I think we have. And I would remind us all that I grew up in Danville, Virginia, last capital of the Confederacy. 150 years ago, we fought a civil war. 800,000 men killed, many more maimed, wounded, hundreds of thousands of women, children, elderly people hurt, wounded. And when the war was over, what happened? Our president was assassinated, Lincoln. Right after that, his successor, Andrew Johnson, was impeached. And somehow we struggled out of the 19th century into the 20th century, just in time to fight not one, but two world wars. Fought them, led them, won them. Cold War, led it, won it. Great Depression, we led the world out of the Great Depression. And when the sun came up on January 1st, 2001, here's where we were as a nation. We had the strongest economy on earth. We had the most productive workforce on earth. We'd had 4 balanced budgets in a row. Democratic president, Republican House and Senate. Chairman of the Budget Committee in the House, my old friend John Kasich, who just stepped down as governor there. We're the most admired nation on earth. We're the mightiest force for justice on earth. And for those who think that we just don't have what it takes anymore to be maybe a great nation for another century or 2 or 3, I would just have us remember what we came through. Democracy is a hard way to govern. Going back to what I was about to say about Churchill. Churchill has all these great sayings. One of the things that I love that Churchill said was, democracy is the worst form of government devised by wit of man, except for all the rest. Think about that. Democracy is the worst form of government devised by wit of man, except for all the rest. He also used to say this about America. He loved America. He liked to poke us, but he knew we saved their rear ends during World War II. But he used to say this about America. He said, you can always count on America to do the right thing at the end after trying everything else. After trying everything else. Well, we're trying a lot of different things, and eventually we're sure to trip over some really good ideas. And the really good ideas, some of them lend themselves to being used more broadly. And at the end of the day, if we can find ways to collaborate and communicate, to compromise, use some civility, maybe we'll end up with some consensus. And in Delaware, those 4 C's, collaborate, communicate, cooperate, civility, those 4 C's are what we call the Delaware way. And they lead to consensus. We could use a little consensus in our country these days. And the country that kind of showed the way 241 years ago in ratifying the Constitution. In a small way, we'd like to try to provide a good example, too, in the way we conduct ourselves. And my hope is that maybe that will inspire some others to do the same thing. Thank you again for what you do. Thank you for bringing health care to folks in this country and trying to do so in a cost-effective way. It's our moral imperative, and it's also our fiscal imperative. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you.